Thanks for having me, Sandeep. Yeah, I currently had a security engagement for Prime Video, where I run a program that really works on advanced security controls for various parts of the business. Everything from infrastructure testing and availability around like DDoS bots and scraping, things like data classification and lineage, general like security engineering, AppSec, various kinds of control testing, really about supporting our developers in understanding how to scale security and understanding the controls in place and how they work.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing that. Hi, everyone. Sandeep here, co-founder and CEO at Defense. Mike, thank you so much for making time for this one. Fourth webinar that we're doing in the series of, how top tech tier companies essentially, operationalize security at scale. Moving on to sort of, continuing on the same theme, keeping vulnerability management as a higher level use case. Roughly, what are the golden signals that you think will help refine all of this security assurance that you need out of these projects and that endeavors that we're really putting together? And I know, some of this could be sort of, very different based on the context, based on the applications or the teams or the part of infrastructure that you're sort of responsible for. But broadly, how do you see this? Can we define this as a set of golden signals that, hey, if you did do this 1, 2, 3, you're largely good, or you're better than you were if you were just, compared to those 100,000, scandals that you had? What would that be? That filter or that sieve which will sort of give a user more confidence, saying that I am looking better now because, I have deeper telemetry, deeper signals that help me prioritize things better.
So I think one of the things is a partially technical thing, but I think it's actually building good threat models, and understanding what pieces are in play. I think one of the second things is having a good or a full inventory. Like it goes back to the coverage example from earlier, right? I can have 90% coverage, but if I'm not covering the right things or the critical things to my business, that's not a great conversation to have, right? Like you don't want to explain why you missed the key 10%. And I know some of this sounds like general, I would say, security care and feeding, but if you look at what many of the incidents that I've been involved in throughout my career, or even the things that are public, it always tends to be a series of control failures. It's never a single one. So, right, an MFA on a user gets popped, great, but least privilege wasn't implemented, encryption wasn't enabled, logging was turned off, or nobody checked to make sure logging was working. So like the telemetry systems you thought were doing things weren't doing exactly what you think they were doing. So like I think a lot of the golden signals come back to doing security basics. And I think like one of the best ways to frame it is if you use something like the NIST framework, cybersecurity framework, where it's like, hey, let's identify, protect, etc. That goes well into what are the golden signals. Do I have network baselines? Do I know what users are supposed to have access? Am I good at revoking users? Where are my users login? Is there deviations from that? I think all the things that we know we should be doing, we need to be able to automate and do them at scale.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I am sort of, I have spoken to so many leaders, from such as yourself, from Amazon, LinkedIn, Snap, and Google. And this is the common theme that I hear, that look, basic block and tackle just doesn't work, or just doesn't happen the way you would anticipate at scale. You just have to go back to it, really, right? Simple checks and balances, many of them fail. You just have to go and ensure that those bits and places. That's a common theme that I'm hearing from pretty much, all the folks that I'm speaking to who handle these problems at scale, right? So absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I would say, right, compliance isn't security. But they are pretty closely related. And I think, like, one of the purposes of audits, whether you find them fun or not, I'm personally not not a huge fan of being audited, but there's value in it as well. And that is really just to make sure you're testing your controls. It's really easy for drift or something else to break a control, or a control doesn't function as expected. Or generally the case that would occur is if an operator needs to manage the control, they haven't looked at the control in a period of time to understand exactly what the control is supposed to do and how to manage it. You see this, I find it to be most common with availability events and DDoS events, or even IR type scenarios where it's like, well, we haven't run that process in a while. So you waste valuable time coming up to speed on the process and the tooling and everything else that you're familiar with, but you're a little stale. And if your business is measured on seconds or minutes, those minutes become very expensive, right? Your customers impacted, your revenue's impacted. You have to test controls.
Absolutely. Controls, and I'm sure runtime drift also sort of plays a role into it, really, right? I mean, drift is a real thing, and there has to be a way to sort of have that accounted for, to be able to say that, hey, everything is nice, everything is good. The basic checks and balances, yes, and even the runtime drift, I'm cognizant of it, I'm measuring it, I know what's happening really, and it's okay, right? So
yeah, and drift's a really interesting point, and I think of course you have infrastructure drift. More and more companies are driving automation, i.e., you're not allowed to be making manual changes in production. I've worked in pretty heavily automated worlds, for many years now, and it's actually gotten easier to scale with automation. And you're more reliant on automation. But where I'm starting to see a lot more drift is actually in data. Because now that we've moved to, I'll just call it like semi-structured data, where things are JSON blobs, and the payload you were getting yesterday may not be the payload you're getting today. And those additions, right, those additional data types influence controls that you might want to have applied, influence regulations that might apply to you. There's a bunch of things where understanding drift and being able to prioritize drift are key to running a successful program.
Absolutely, Mike. Yeah, absolutely. With that, what we'll do, we'll just move on to the next question.
Listen to the full webinar at deepfence.io/resources.